Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And TheTaraReade came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer. And knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers. And knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character. That his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just dragged their feet addressing Tara's allegations. Until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on every station. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended.
In the world, right? Most censored comedian in the world.
Yeah, I'm not as persecuted as you at the moment, but for a comedian, I am rather censored. There's very few people who have had their entire YouTube channel banned around the world.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And what's happening with that? Like now that you've gone independent, done your own thing, you're doing some stuff, has some of that suppression or censorship lifted a little, or no? Are we still?
Very little. I mean, I have a new YouTube channel and I still have my website, leecamp.com, but you know, I'm working more with Rumble now, but my YouTube is, even my new YouTube, my old one is banned around the world, but my new YouTube is incredibly suppressed and censored. It's, you know, you could just see the analytics and they're not really showing it to anyone. Twitter's pretty similar. Facebook's pretty similar. So really it hasn't lifted much. It's just that I've gone to other platforms like Rumble to try and get away from some of the suppression. And for those who don't know my stuff, you know, this is all basically because I have been doing anti-war, anti-capitalist, destruction of the planet comedy for 20 some years. And you're not really allowed to be anti-war and pro-justice and pro-equality in the United States. At least not if you get a platform where people are listening. If people aren't listening, they'll let you do it. But
exactly. And you got a little too big there, especially during, your Wall Street, all the work that you did way back then too. I mean, you're always very popular on the East Coast in particular. And, it's amazing how comedy that's politically, centered, you have to be following that empire narrative in order to really have a voice, or they just shut your ass down. I mean, there's no question. You just have to be licking the boots of the man or forget it.
Yeah, there's a very clear Overton window once you start to examine it, which most people don't. And people will go, "What? I don't understand." There's political critique. There's what they think is right wing and left wing. There's Fox News on one side, Daily Show on the other, like very different. And yes, they are different in certain respects, but neither of those sides, or if you want to call them sides, will go outside of capitalism or go outside of the idea that the Democrats and Republicans are the polar opposites of worldviews and not really two wings of the same bird, or as George Galloway says, two cheeks of the same backside. They agree. The truth is, Democrats and Republicans in Congress and the government agree on 80 to 90% of the structural issues of our country. They agree on unfettered capitalism. They agree on environmental destruction, even if they may speak differently. Sometimes their actions show that they're not actually going to change those things. And they do everything they can to crush thought that dare be outside of that realm of thought. And you can see this, Joe Biden is the perfect example, because this is a man who's devoted his career to increasing the prison state to the largest it's ever been, increasing the war state, increasing the police funding, no matter how brutal or racist they are. At every level, and he's been funded through his career by credit card companies and banks, and even when he seems to be doing something positive, like they just announced they're going to erase, I believe the loans of 43,000. No, it was like 800,000 people or something like that are going to have their loans wiped away, and that sounds great, except that it's 43 million people who have college loans right now. So it is a tiny fraction. And Joe Biden helped create this student loan bubble that is crushing so many people. He made it so that they can't declare bankruptcy and they can't get out of that. So, yeah.
You made a good point, because that's true. I mean, I think in a conversation once I think we were sharing, I was talking about, now that I'm over here in Russia, I was kind of inquiring about the education system, which there is some private institutions, they do pay, but the tuition is the equivalent of, for instance, you can get a degree for basically $5,000 for a year. And upper level. So a lot of people here have PhDs or masters. They go on to study very specific things that they want to get into. You have people that are multilingual here, because they have access to education. They've read, like most Western authors, as well as Russian and Eastern authors and history. Whereas I just feel like the American is it's just going downhill because it's affordable and accessible. Everywhere you go, you can access education here. And I think even parts of Europe still have a lot of good educational benefits. Some are cutting back, but the US definitely is the worst. And like I shared, I think it was with you on your show, actually. My daughter is graduating this year from her master's, and she's going to have, even with some of my help, I helped as much as I could, just a bit. She did a lot. She worked the entire time she was in college and her master's. She's still graduating with almost $200,000 worth of debt.
Wow.
And that's average. And when I got my law degree, it was over $200,000, and I had 1 year of an academic scholarship. So it's just, and so you enter the world in debt and unable to even pay it back, like in a reasonable amount of time, right?
Yeah, it defines people's lives. And I was lucky. For one thing, in state in Virginia in the 90s was relatively still affordable. But my parents, I come from the middle class. My parents were able to pay for my college, and I didn't come out of it with loans, which allowed me to, follow my passion and do what I want to do. And so many people get trapped into lives that they don't necessarily want to be in because they have no other way to pay for the interest on these loans or the principal. And to me, it's in a larger sense, if you really look at the heart of it, it's part of a strategy to kind of entrench the class structure. Those who are rich, none of this, truly rich, none of this matters. You pay for college and you pay for university, and even the top level university is not that big of a deal for the rich. Whereas those who are in the middle class get stuck in whatever life that they've signed up for in order to make enough money in order to pay for those loans. And the people below that in the class structure don't even have the possibility to go to university to begin with. So to me, it's partially designed to entrench the class structure and make sure there's not, yes, there is upward mobility in America, but not that much more than most countries.
Well, it's almost like a caste system, isn't it? We've entered a caste system. And I mean, you look at our politicians, and even our politicians seem to think that their children should go on and just replace them and like, I'll give the example, my old boss, Leon Panetta, who's representing the Monterey Peninsula area where he's from, his son, Jimmy Panetta. Why? Because he just handed down and no one questioned it. And it happens all over California, and it happens all over other states as well.
Well, I got to push back a little here. Hunter Biden earned that post on the Burisma board, okay? He fought very hard. He worked his way up at Burisma. Yeah. He was there for 40 years, and that's how he got that.
And damn Marjorie Taylor Greene for showing his nude photos. I mean, that's just terrible. The way she showed
that is
human trafficking.
It's a terror attack is what it is.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there was a big announcement today by his attorney of how horrific that was. And it's like, okay, but nothing about the drugs or the human trafficking was mentioned.
Yes. I mean, as I said, when those things were coming out, when the laptop stuff was first coming out, on one hand, I don't think it should matter what a politician's kid is doing. Doesn't matter his age. I know he's not a kid, but what a politician's son or daughter is doing with their lives, I don't care. And if it's with consensual adults, I don't care. What I do care about is hypocrisy. Joe Biden's, changed the drug laws to lock up so many, hundreds of thousands of people locked up in America for small, petty drug crimes. And then meanwhile, his son is obviously addicted to drugs and using all of these same drugs that people are getting locked up for. So what I care about is the hypocrisy. I don't actually think that our drug laws should be like that. I think drugs should be a health issue, not a crime issue. But to me, it's the hypocrisy. It's not how Hunter Biden chooses to behave.
Well, there's the influence peddling and the bribery and the corruption and there's that.
All of that as well. But that then that delves into not just hypocrisy, but also corruption. That is just corruption, standard corruption.
Yeah. Not it's definitely the Biden, in my opinion, it's a mafia state. I mean, it's just at this point, it's a mafia state. The way they've tried to suppress the whistleblower witnesses, including myself, and tried to suppress us using, their tactics. And you have people behind the scenes like that you don't know about in the public, mostly Ted Kaufman, who is my chief of staff. Biden's chief of staff, my supervisor, who I went to when all this happened. He's still by Joe Biden's side, making a lot of decisions behind the scenes. And Ted Kaufman is a very bad dude. And so is Dennis Toner, and they're very corrupt. You have all the corruption. But speaking of like censoring, corruption, politicians, I wanted to kind of delve into what's going on with the Democrats attacking their own and then also other independent candidates like Green Party, Cornel West, as well as RFK. But what are your thoughts about some of the attacks that have been going on? I know you did a couple of segments on this as well with Cornel and West, and just
and
viciousness of the media and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I'm having Cornel West on to talk about it as well next week.
Cool.
People can check that out at leecamp.com.
When is that? When is that next week? What day?
Wednesday of next week.
Wednesday. Okay, great. Okay.
But when you have a candidate as weak as Joe Biden, he was weak as a candidate when he was with it mentally, and he's now weak times 10 because he can't even speak clearly. So when you have a candidate as weak as Joe Biden, and you have to shut out all other ideas that there could be someone other than Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee. And so you of course they're going after, RFK Jr. at every turn that they can. The latest thing is they're trying the game plan they used against Jeremy Corbyn of anti-Semitism. That's their latest one they're using. And I have plenty of issues of things that with things that RFK Jr. stands for, but I feel he should be able to have a fair primary against Joe Biden, which would be how you would run a legitimate democracy, which we're not. And then there's Cornel West running as the Green Party candidate, or trying to get the Green Party candidacy. And Cornel West is amazing. He's done amazing things for so many years, and he's spoken so strongly about so many important things. Right. And yet they have him so rarely on mainstream media. It's pretty similar to Bernie Sanders. They have him so rarely on mainstream media. And when they do, they need to spend that time trying to pick apart and make him look like some sort of crazy-minded radical. And it's completely disgusting. There's never a positive discussion in any way. They want to call him a spoiler, as if you could spoil the Democratic Party that has put us into an infinite war state with endless environmental destruction, and you're going to spoil the gravy train for the richest and most corrupt in the world. You're going to spoil their easy win for the presidency. It's so disgusting, and it really reveals what the mainstream media is. And that clip you're showing there of Anderson Cooper with Cornel West was truly hysterical. Let's listen to it.
Go ahead. I want you to comment on it. Yeah. Hey, could you
play
it?
Absolutely. You criticized President Biden, saying recently that he contributed, in your words, I'm quoting, contributed to a crime against humanity when he became the architect of the mass incarceration regime in the 1990s. You're referring to the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act that then Senator Biden sponsored. You also said it's, quote, very clear that his cognitive powers are in decline.
Well, I would have followed George Kennan. I would have abolished NATO right after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and I would have tried to welcome Russia into the nation, the community of nations, rather than trying to push them against the wall. We know that their system of repression and domination is one in which they're going to feel as if their backs are against the wall. And I think you would probably agree that if Russia or China had missiles in Canada or Mexico targeting Washington, D.C., U.S. government would blow them to smithereens. That's how empires behave. You've read the history. I know the history. We're critical of imperial activity, no matter who it is, American, Russian, and what have you. But America is the most powerful empire in the world, in the history of the world, my brother. And it seems to me, if we can't dismantle that empire in order to empower poor and working people here and abroad, we're going to lose our democracy. It's almost like Rome, it was Cato the Younger and Cicero against Julius Caesar.
Right, but there's
what happens when your empire begins to take over your democratic possibilities. And I don't want World War III. I don't want World War III. The way that we're moving now, we got 3,000 advisors. Well, we heard that in Vietnam. We're on the way to possible nuclear exchange. How ugly. Here we got Trump pushing us toward the second civil war at home. You got Biden pushing us toward a third world war abroad. We need an alternative. That's what this campaign's probably about, my brother.
You criticize.
Well, we didn't get to the one part, but there was another part where they were comparing the bombing. I'm trying to remember the exact quote, but Lee, go ahead and take it from there. What are your comments about what he had to say there?
Yeah, well, you showed all the great moments for Cornel West speaking there, but what we didn't get to in those clips, which is fine, is Anderson Cooper trying desperately to try and shut down Cornel West, and his response in part of it is he says, "Oh, well, Russia bombed Grozny in Chechnya, right, and how horrific, and and even if you wanted to just say, okay, it was they just bombed random civilians, that was it. Even if you wanted to say that, then Cornel West says, well, what about Iraq? And Anderson Cooper just says, you cannot compare what was done in Grozny with Iraq. And it's like, no, you can't, because in one of them, a few hundred people died, and the other, 1 million people died.
A million, yeah.
The Anderson Cooper just looks stunned that you could dare compare the invasion of Iraq with, and it just shows how disgusting these human beings are. But like, the Brown University cost of war study shows that 6 million people have been killed by the United States in our global war on terror, including Iraq. 1 million in Iraq and 5 million elsewhere. And that is above and beyond anything any other country has done.
Comprehension. It's beyond comprehension. Almost.
It really is. And to have Anderson Cooper, your mainstream media, sit there and act appalled that anyone would dare chastise the United States for invasion of Iraq. And of course, he can't call it invasion of Iraq. Anderson Cooper said, our actions in Iraq. And then he tried to defend it by saying, I was there, Anderson Cooper being a reporter in Iraq. And it's like, that's not a defense. That's an indictment. You were there manufacturing consent for that war.
Exactly. That shouldn't have been. But let's talk about Anderson Cooper. I mean, who is he, right? He's the son of a very, very wealthy old money family, right?
Yeah, he's a Vanderbilt and comes from crazy money. Also was an intern. I can't remember if it was 1 year or 2 years for the CIA. And he's in interviews,
and that's how all of them are. I mean, like at this point, on CNN and MSNBC, and I mean, Lee, you worked for RT, and whenever anybody works for RT, they immediately say you're a spy for Russia, right? That's the Democrats' go-to, right? That's their go-to, and Vladimir Putin must have a huge payroll because simply everyone who speaks against Democrats is on his payroll, I guess.
Oh, yeah. They tried to accuse Bernie, Jill Stein, Tulsi Gabbard.
RFK Jr., they just came out with a headline this morning. It says, why Russia loves RFK. Yeah, and someone wrote the lip below it. Like, I can't fucking believe they're doing that again.
They love that garbage. And during my time there, so I was there for 8 years. I did a weekly show called Redacted Tonight, and I was never censored. I was never told what to say. I was never told I had to say anything. The reason I was there is because something like that had really never existed on American television and probably will never exist again, where I was able to be full-throatedly anti-war, anti-capitalism, anti-environmental destruction, pro-justice, and never have to worry about being censored out of saying any of those things. And I knew that it would. I knew that it was rare. I knew it wouldn't happen again, and I didn't know it would end when it did. But I kind of figured that at some point the U.S. empire, which is rather fragile, can't handle. And I don't just mean me, but I mean everyone on that network can't handle people speaking the truth like that. It's so easy to unravel propaganda because it is so insane. It is so ridiculous that unraveling it just takes a few minutes, but. Now they're trying to make sure people like me and you are as suppressed and censored as possible.
It's true. I mean, yeah. And RT's even been banned in certain countries. There's even, Alina Lip is a reporter who went to Donbass, and she's a young reporter. She interviewed some people in Donbass that were happy that the Russians were there because they were being bombed by their own government, by Kiev. And they were talking about it. Well, that report the Germans didn't like, and she had to flee. She's in now under the protection of Russia, but they shut down her parents' bank account, and they threatened her with 7 years in prison for that reporting. And so you see a lot of people really being more than suppressed. They're being attacked. Kit Clarenberg has been detained at times in Britain. They took all of his they let him go, but they took all of his recording material and all of that and detained him and questioned him. Yeah,
they
treated like criminals.
He's a great writer for The Gray Zone, and they detained him for I think 5 hours at the airport in London, where I think he's originally from.
Yes.
But one of the main questions he said was they kept asking him, have you been in connection to Russia? Has Russia told you to say? Did they leak files to you? And nothing they've done is in connection to Russia, but the interrogators were certain that he was some sort of Russian agent.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's their own citizen. I mean, it's really, have you ever seen anything like this in your lifetime, Lee? Because you've been an activist for a long time. Is it just me, or does it feel like it's like between Europe, the NATO countries, and America, that there's just an unbelievable amount of attacks on journalists and on citizen journalists, for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like it's ramping up. I think we saw a brief window of kind of truly free exchange of information when the internet became fast and reliable and was in everybody's houses, starting maybe in 2006 or a little after. And then that resulted in, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, the Bernie Sanders movement, WikiLeaks, all of these things. And they needed to shut it down. So then immediately after Bernie Sanders almost won the primary and won the nomination for president, but then they were able to rig it against him, barely. But the fact that he almost won terrified the ruling elite, and they have really shut down the free flow of information on the internet since that time, 2016. And it really does feel like the suppression and the censorship has ramped up in a very quick way. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no time in America's history where it's been like this before. Eugene Debs, who ran for president in prison because he dared speak against the U.S. war at that time in the early 1900s. And you even have comedians. Lenny Bruce was basically driven to his death, arrested at nearly every performance because he was speaking out against both the police and the church. And you have, of course, the endless persecution of the Black Panthers and people connected or working with the Black Panthers, people assassinated in their beds like Fred Hampton, and Mumia Abu-Jamal, who was a renowned journalist before he was framed and now is sitting in prison for decades. So the U.S. has a history of this, but I do feel that it is ramping up in a pretty terrible way.
Yeah, and speaking of going back to the subject of Cornel West and RFK and their candidacies, what was startling to me yesterday was they did, well, it shouldn't even be startling to me. It's just like another nail in the coffin of free speech. But at that hearing, when he was trying to talk, Wasserman made a motion to censor him at a censorship hearing where he's talking about being censored. I know there's a comic routine in there, and I know you, my brother Colin, who's a comic as well, could come up with something, but that just seemed so ironic. And when they were questioning one of the Democrats, another representative, they said, we're not censoring him. We just don't want to hear him talk. It's like, oh, okay. Banging my head against a wall.
I mean, well, that's the other kind of irony of this is some of the worst censorship. I mean, maybe the worst censorship right now is coming from what people think is the left. Now, the Democrats are not the left, but what they think is the left. And I mean, not just against RFK and the likes of him. By the way, many YouTubers have been shut down or gotten strikes against them for even just playing clips of RFK or saying they support him or something like that. They're getting their channels suspended. But not just against RFK, but Matt Taibbi, a great journalist who revealed the Twitter files. Right. They've weaponized the IRS and weaponized the Congress against him. The day he revealed the Twitter files, which basically showed Twitter to be working hand in fist with U.S. intelligence agencies, they opened an IRS file on him. The day he testified in front of Congress, the IRS raided his house. And then after he was done testifying, various Democrats, including AOC, basically said he should be arrested for perjury because they didn't like what he said.
Wow.
And they really there was really talk of whether he should be arrested. I mean, it's just amazing to see journalists persecuted like this. And obviously we haven't even gotten into Julian Assange, but it's just horrific. And it all comes down to the U.S. empire is faltering, it's fading, it's waning. They don't care. These ruling elite don't care about the average citizens at all anymore. The infrastructure is collapsing, and they need to cover up all reality in order to get people to think that these people have your interests at heart in any way.
You know what? Everything you're saying is so true. And, it's interesting because when I said similar things, and I was talking about the homeless crisis, over 600,000 homeless, the highest child poverty rate in history right now is happening, the highest inflation in 40 years. In a USA Today article, a former CIA commented on me and being in Russia and whatnot, and said he was viscerally angry by what I had to say about the state of the US, and I was like, I was just stating statistics that actually have been like thrown out by Washington Post or by like the mainstream media, not just, independent media. So what are you viscerally angry about? Like, actually, so isn't that interesting? When they hear the truth, like what you just said, that's what has to be suppressed. That's what has to be almost like that speech is somehow they have to criminalize or make it a bad thing to say or villainize the person saying it.
Yeah,
So
it's an old playbook of you go after who the person is in order to try and undermine the truth they're revealing, and they've used it. And of course, that involves making things up about the person as well. And they're doing it right now against Matt Taibbi. They did it against Snowden. They did it against Assange. They did it, of course, against you. Where it's tougher to go at the facts, and so instead they just try and tarnish the overall idea of the person in Americans' minds, and then the persecution or the arrest or the imprisonment or whatever seems to make sense to your average American. Well, wasn't that a bad person? Wasn't that a bad guy? Okay. It doesn't matter whether there's actually a reason to arrest that person.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a really good point. And speaking of Julian Assange, now it's imminent, right? His, as far as the extradition, do you think that there's any hope that the Biden administration politically is going to say, okay, we're going to drop, or do you think they're doubling down and just going to go through with it?
I mean, I keep a little bit of hope, but it very much does look like they're doubling down because journalists in the UK have come forward to reveal that the FBI, even today, is trying to pressure them into revealing something about Assange, which means that the FBI continues to try and grow its case against Assange, which is the opposite of this thing winding down in any way. And I think the U.S. kind of was hoping that Assange would just die in prison and they wouldn't have to deal with this anymore. They don't want him to be free. They want to punish him to the nth degree so that no one dare reveal the crimes of the U.S. empire again. But yeah, it certainly doesn't look good. And everyone knows that Julian Assange would get whatever is the opposite of a fair trial in the US. Calling it a kangaroo court would be an insult to kangaroos. I mean, the US court system against whistleblowers and against those who reveal the crimes of the empire is just the farthest thing from justice. If it ran into justice in a closed elevator, they wouldn't recognize each other. So it's, I mean, I hope that there is some chance. I know that Australia's prime minister has been asking for him to be sent back to Australia for the first time. So, people got some hope around that, but it's not looking good.
Yeah, especially since Australia and New Zealand are pretty much just vassals of the US and the British Empire. I mean, but it is remarkable the overreach of the US to take an Australian citizen on espionage charges that's never lived in the US and bring them to the US as if, it's really, to me, the overreach, that legal issue is enough to make that case fall apart. Besides the fact that there isn't any evidence. It really
is unheard of. There is no precedent for going after a journalist that is not from your country, never operated in your country, and to say, oh, but we still have the right to torture them in prison for the rest of their life. And every journalist around the world should be not just furious, but terrified if this is the norm. That the U.S. can just come after anyone for revealing a truth they didn't like, whether it's a U.S. citizen. It basically says that U.S. law is global law, which is absolutely not the case, but it basically is saying that.
That's a good point, Lee. And that's a frightening thing because it's not. The U.S. law is not international law. It is not. and there is no precedent for that. And you don't see any of the international legal community really making any headway with that. You see some advocates that are really talking about the Assange case in particular, but they don't have any teeth. They're not doing anything. So it is frustrating.
Yeah, and even the ones that are standing up, it took them years. It wasn't for very few was it on day one. It's basically now that he looks like he might die in prison, a few have chirped up. But
but like you said, everyone should be paying attention that has anything to do with journalism, because, but not just journalism. There's Chris Ems, who was a crypto, kind of one of the crypto people, old guard, who was part of that movement. He had done a conference. He's English, British, never lived in the US ever, just visited, but never lived there. British citizen that was invited by LinkedIn to a conference in North Korea, went to North Korea and talked about blockchain, didn't talk about any secrets, literally Googled just what's available on Google, wrote something on a whiteboard. The US, he's the third most wanted in the FBI. He now has asylum in Russia, but he's the third most wanted man for counterintelligence in the FBI for literally writing on a whiteboard at a conference in North Korea about blockchain and crypto. But they're going after crypto because he's into non-centralized, currency.
Right. And
the US doesn't want that. So another one of his colleagues is in prison in the US. He did not do that. They put him in prison in Saudi Arabia, and he was able to get out with the help of Rada Sterling and into Russia. He basically, one of the times he got out, because they were going to extradite him to the US, he got to Russia kind of under the radar. And now he's in asylum. But he's not a journalist. This is all business. This is crypto. So every single person needs to be listening to what this overreach is. He has no reason to be considered a US citizen, and yet they're trying to bring him in under the Espionage Act to the US. They tried to extradite him. So it's happening. It's happening over and over again.
And the Espionage Act is an insane. It was an insane law to begin with, and it was, it had been used very rarely since it went into effect in 1917 or something. And then Obama basically doubled the usage of it, and then it's just gone off to the races since then, where they're using it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, they're using it for, now even for economic, there's a big push, as you know, with the cryptocurrency for the US once it's centralized. They want and under centralized banking. Yeah. They don't want, people to be able to freely use digital money without being basically have the social credit attached to it. So, one of the things that's been happening, speaking of, money and all of that, people are really struggling in the US. And I noticed this, I experienced this myself as well. Low wages, stagnant wages. There's a lot of tough working environments. You now have a bunch of strikes happening all over across the country. You have, besides, Starbucks, you can go on and on. But Lee, I wanted to ask you.
Hollywood shut down.
Hollywood, about Hollywood shutting down. What does this mean, and how will it impact the economy and some of these strikes? And of course, you got AOC in there with her 2 cents, right?
Well, right now we're seeing a mass movement of workers realizing that they have power, and yes, part of it is hardship. Part of it is the fact that people can't even pay for groceries anymore. But another piece of it is that workers are uniting. They're working together. They're seeing that strikes are working. You're seeing unionization efforts are Starbucks is doing everything they can to try and stop them, and they're largely failing. You see these massive strikes. All of Hollywood is shut down now. UPS is getting ready to go on strike. And this is part of the reason that the Fed and the ruling elite, for lack of a better term, are trying to have forced the U.S. into a recession, because people get fired, they start to fear for their job, and then workers don't have as much power anymore. But right now, workers are very much, this has become the summer of the worker in many ways, and are standing up and fighting back against the just breathtaking greed of a tiny number of individuals. I mean, 3 men in America have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50%, or maybe it's even higher than that now, of Americans. It's absolutely absolutely just incredible, just jaw-dropping. And it's, you know, the Gini coefficient is what measures the inequality in a country, and our Gini coefficient is now worse than it was at the end of ancient Rome when they collapsed. So you know, workers are standing up, and it is good to see. It is so important. And yeah, I like seeing workers coming together, and obviously the powerful and the rich are terrified of this.
You know, as far as like the one of the things that's come up with the Hollywood strike, this is the first time, right, that the writers and the actors are at once. It's like it's in decades that this strike is happening at once. So it's gonna shut down the whole industry. But one of the big subject matter is about AI. What is your thoughts on that? And around that, and workers, you know, protesting and having concerns about AI. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, AI, like, we're just getting a taste of what its power is. It's already incredible that you can ask it to, you know, summarize a 1,000-page book and it'll do it in 3 seconds. And this is going to eliminate massive amounts of the workforce, not to mention self-driving vehicles and everything else. Now, there's one way to look at this, which is just, oh my God, terrifying. Workers are going to be on the streets. What are they going to do? Now, a adult, rational way to look at the entirety of our socioeconomic system would go, hey, well, this is great that workers don't have to work as hard if that savings of time and money goes to the workers, if it goes to all of the people, if all of a sudden they have more time for their passions and their loves and their creativity and their ability to thrive and have a family and all those things, then wonderful. But instead, we don't deal with it that way. We deal with it exactly one way, which is all the savings of time and money goes to a tiny group of individuals who will use it to enrich themselves even more. And that will keep happening until people stand up.
Do you know, someone was asking me here in Russia, it was actually a Russian person was saying they were puzzled by, you know, the lack of infrastructure, the problems that we're having in the US. And they were saying, why isn't there more people out in the streets? Are Americans going to finally get out in the streets about all this corruption, all this, you know, whatever? And I said, I don't know. It doesn't look like it. What are your thoughts on that? And people being able to, because you were part of some protests, and you know, you've been an activist for a long time. Do you feel as comfortable now knowing with the way the police state is and how certain demonstrations have gone in the recent past? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of why Americans haven't stood up enough, why there aren't protests in the street enough, I think it's because a lot of people are really into the Marvel movies. They're
Really, yeah.
Really good distraction.
Yes.
No, but in all seriousness, like, the bread and circuses works pretty well.
Right.
People are very distracted. On top of that, of course, it has to do with hardship. I think most people, they have kids, they have 2 and 3 jobs. They're just working at every moment and barely surviving. And so the idea of, I'm going to go down and protest, or I'm going to join a group to help organize, just seems like, you know, where am I going to find the time for that? But yeah, it's a combination of the two. It's you crush people and you apply them with bread and circuses, and you do it that way. And then when people do stand up in a very large way, you arrest them. So, you know, we are seeing some of the best protests happening in the past few weeks have been climate defiance and other climate activists going into Biden's meetings of various committees and things, and various lawmakers approving new pipelines in the middle of this crisis, climate crisis. And they're doing great protests. But of course, many of them do get arrested, and then they have to fight law fees and fight for their freedom. And so the final step to stopping people from standing up is heavily armed police, and they certainly use those too.
And the robo dogs, now they're going to be doing that.
Yes, well. Yeah, sending a dog at
you. Yes, yeah, that's happening in Seattle actually, and I think Minneapolis has they actually are going to be doing some test runs on
Yeah,
those.
those are terrifying.
cool.
I know there's a robot that was in some areas of San Francisco that would wander around and push homeless people out of the way to stop them from sleeping, which, really shows our humanity and our morality. And that really is good to see we're using technology that way.
To spend the money that way instead of maybe spending the money to give that person a home or a place to be. Yeah, it's it's mind-boggling. Hey, Reef, I wanted to ask if you had any questions or comments for Lee.
Yeah, I got one. As a fan of comedy myself, I know you've been a comic for a while. What's your favorite chapter and verse in the Book of Carlin? That's what I want to know. Your favorite Carlin bit.
To pick a favorite is pretty tough. His bit on the American war machine and Americans aren't good at anything anymore except we're damn good at bombing brown people. I think when he was saying some of those things, people were really blown away. They hadn't heard such a thing on television before, and it really did shock people, which was the goal. And I'm glad he was there to do it. Unfortunately, I never got to meet him, but I am lucky enough to be friends with his daughter, Kelly Carlin, who's an amazing human being herself. And Carlin really he set a bar far too high for those of us who wanted to be political comedians. So.
Yeah, he was really powerful. He really was. I still watch some of his clips sometimes, he would be. I would love to hear some of his comedy now. So speaking of comedy, are you on the road at all? Are you doing anything with your comedy? Or are you focusing on more of your show, or what are some of your creative projects that you have going right now?
Most of it is online now. The combination of the weirdness around live shows with the pandemic, and also I have a new human I've been tending to. So I haven't been doing many.
They do that. Yeah,
they do. They take time. So I haven't been doing many live shows. Unfortunately, I enjoy them. But in terms of creative pursuits outside of just my live stream, which is called Dangerous Ideas, I also have an ebook that just came out called Dangerous Ideas as well. And cool. Another creative pursuit is it just occurred to me, what if we had a presidential candidate that had never been a war criminal, had never supported a war, had never taken $1 from a weapons contractor, had never caused any environmental damage, had never locked anyone up. And so I decided to be the chief of staff, the campaign advisor for a rock that's running for president that I found out on the street. And this guy has a better resume than any body in the two-party corporate duopoly. I mean, he's never been involved in a war crime. He's never.
Wait. But isn't he going to send some money to Ukraine? No. No,
he promises to send $0 to Ukraine. So just he's doing amazing. And in my admittedly unofficial polling, he is kicking the ass of Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Latest poll, he's running 73% against Trump and Biden. And so you check out yardrock2024.com. Yardrock2024.com, and 50% of all the, there's a bumper sticker and a t-shirt there, and 50% of all the merch proceeds go to erase medical debt for struggling Americans. I know medical debt's not a thing in a lot of countries, but in the US it really destroys lives. And we've already erased $27,000 of medical debt. This part's not a joke. $27,000 of medical debt has been erased for struggling Americans.
And that's what a rock could do.
And that rock has erased more medical debt than Trump and Biden combined. So.
There you have it. Lee Camp. All right. So leecamp.com, right?
Yep.
Wednesday, you got Cornel West. That's going to be an exciting show. And you've got your ebook. Reef, do you have a picture of the ebook real quick? Okay. I'll give you a second. And then, I put Reef on the spot there. I love to do that.
I know. I wonder whether he actually can find it, considering for the moment it's only available for my subscribers. So,
there you have it.
That is not it.
No, that's not it.
There's a reverend whose name is Lee C. Camp. Yeah, but Anyway,
So audience, disregard that one.
it is weird because
Let's-
people look up. I have another book that is out everywhere called Bullet Points and Punchlines, but people
Okay.
look up my book, they find his, and they're like, "Lee, are you a evangelical Christian or whatever?"
have you found Jesus since you left RT?
Yeah. Not quite.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. Well, I'm so glad that you have an ebook coming out, and that's awesome. And they can find it at leecamp.com, I assume. And yep. Okay, cool. And the rock again, where can we find your rock?
Yard Rock. Oh, this site he could pull up, yardrock2024.com.
Yeah.
We'll give him something that's actually capable of.
It's actually, he can actually like do on the fly. And we want poor Reeve. Like for me, it's past midnight. So, but for him, it's early. So come on, Reeve. It's not like it's 3 a.m.
There it is.
Folder together. Oh my God, Lee, that's classic. I love it. Well, thank you for joining us. I love spending time with you. And it's even a continent away. It's wonderful. I feel close to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really hope your situation gets better. And
it's fine. I'm doing great. Yeah. I feel like I took a step up in life.
Good.
I feel, actually, no, seriously, I am doing very well in Moscow, Russia, and I would encourage people to be a tourist and check it out. You can be a tourist here. And Russia, it's beautiful. I've been discovering the country, and I'm doing well. But hey, it was good to talk with you, Lee. I'm so glad you've got so many things going on, and keep calling out the empire, because while it crumbles, it's good to see somebody doing something like erasing medical debt, like bringing awareness to what's going on with the striking workers. So thank you for all you do, Lee.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Take care.
Take care.
Well, that's it. Good night, everyone. And we will see you next week. And I think we're going to be having Chris Ems, that crypto FBI most wanted. So I run with a rough crowd, but we're nice and we're kind, believe it or not. So I think it's a badge of honor now if the government's after you, right? So anyway, join us next week for that show. Good night, everyone.